Hey everyone, welcome to another kind of midweek video. So the text this week is "The life you save may be your own." I wonder if that's going to come up as a mirror image when you see it. So it is the second story in Flannery O'Connor's collection that we'll be going through. So once again, just as a caveat, whenever I do these videos of things that we're reading in class, please understand that this is my take. The only reason I'm providing this for you primarily is to give you some juice to work with. So if you read the text and you come up with a completely different conclusion, interpretation, takeaway, that is valid. I'm not some all-knowing wizard who can interpret literature better than anyone else. I am a certain individual with a certain perspective that's basically built from my own experiences, just as you are a certain individual who has an interpretation of the world based off of your own experiences. And neither of us has a more valid interpretation. Okay? So keep that in mind as you're writing your posts. You do not have to cater what you're writing to what I am saying. This is just something that will help you be thinking through the story a little bit more. So The Life You Save May Be Your Own shares a little bit of similarities with A Good Man Is Hard to Find in that we have this kind of more or less protagonist, but I won't even say she's the protagonist. We have this kind of old woman, right? And we know that she's a mom, but she's unnamed, just like the grandmother is in A Good Man Is Hard to Find. And we have this character, Mr. Shiflett, who appears on the scene, and we don't know much about this guy. He's pretty shifty. We know that he's missing like an arm. He's got kind of the stump of an arm. We also know that the old woman, she's judging him based off of his appearance, right? So Mr. Shiflett, she could tell even from a distance, was a tramp and no one to be afraid of, right? So we get a little bit of these same kind of values that this kind of old world has that we saw in A Good Man Is Hard to Find. This old woman is already judgmental of this person that is approaching. So as Mr. Shiflett is approaching the old woman and also her daughter, who we know has some kind of disability, the old woman didn't change her position until he was almost into her yard. Then she rose with one hand fisted on her hip. The daughter, a large girl in a short blue organdy dress, saw him all at once and jumped up and began to stamp and point and make excited, speechless sounds, which feels uncharacteristic, right? So this is kind of the first clue into the idea that this girl, there's something different about her that is drawing our attention. So once again, borrowing from George Saunders, he says that we have this bin that we create in our heads called the things I couldn't help but notice bin. So we'll just put that right there. So Mr. Shiflett stopped just inside the yard and set his box on the ground and tipped his hat at her as if she were not in the least afflicted, which seems like kind of a bit of kindness from my perspective. So he's acknowledging this girl as if she was perfectly normal, right? So he seemed to be a young man, but he had a look of composed dissatisfaction, as if he understood life thoroughly. So he appears as someone who understands life. So we're kind of imbuing him already with a sense of wisdom. He has experiences, which we're going to see, right? And then it describes him in this way. The tramp, which is Mr. Shiflett, stood looking at her and didn't answer. He turned his back and faced the sunset. He swung both his whole and his short arm up slowly so that they indicated an expanse of sky, and his figure formed a crooked cross, which is an important symbol, right? Now, I don't want to be the typical English teacher and kind of read so much into these symbols that it overtakes our enjoyment of the story or even kind of colors our interpretation to where there's no way we can look past it. But this is important, especially since we have an understanding of Flannery O'Connor, right? We know that she's Catholic. We know that she's constantly wrestling with the ideas of faith and authenticity within our faith. And now we have this character posing as a type of a Christ cross symbol. That's important. It's important to know that. So they start talking about different things once he's arrived on the scene, and they point out the old car. Mr. Shiflett notices the car, which is going to become important later on. The old woman says, "That car ain't run in 15 years. The day my husband died, quit running." And listen to this. This bears a striking resemblance to conversations between Red Sammy and the grandmother in A Good Man Is Hard to Find. "Nothing is like it used to be, lady," he said. "The world is almost rotten." "That's right," the old woman said. And then she asked, "You from around here?" So already we're getting this sense of kind of wisdom that Mr. Shiflett has, where he's acknowledging things are bad, and presumably I'm a wise person who can see this and understand it. And this becomes important. So understand that he's showing a sense of moral compass here. Things are bad, and the old woman agrees. And there's a couple times, maybe even 3 times, or maybe it's just twice, that the old woman asks, "Well, where are you from?" And Mr. Shiflett just dodges it. He does not really acknowledge this question, and eventually kind of confesses to the idea, like, well, what does it matter where I'm from? I'm a man, right? That's what's important that's going on here. And listen to this description. So he draws out the car again. He judged the car to be about a 1928 or 29 Ford. "Lady," he said, and turned and gave her his full attention, "let me tell you something. There's one of these doctors in Atlanta that's taken a knife and cut the human heart. The human heart," he repeated, leaning forward, "out of a man's chest, and held it in his hand. And he held his hand out, palm up, as if it were slightly weighted. Then the human heart, and studied it like it was a day-old chicken, lady," he said, allowing a long, significant pause, in which his head slid forward and his clay-colored eyes brightened. "You don't know no more about it than you or me." "That's right," the old woman said. "Why, if he was to take that knife and cut into every corner of it, he still wouldn't know no more than you or me. What you want to bet?" "Nothing," the old woman said wisely. Now, this is something that we need to place in our couldn't help but notice bin. So we see that Mr. Shiflett is bringing up this anecdote about doctors cutting open the human heart. Now, when we say the human heart, obviously that carries a lot of weight to it, because it can mean the physical organ in your chest that's pumping blood. But we know that when we speak of it, especially in terms of literature or art, it carries a lot more weight than that. The heart is something that we feel with, that we understand the world with, that we interpret the world through. And that's the sense that Mr. Shiflett is talking about here. So even if someone can cut open the human heart, they can investigate it, and they can look at every nook and cranny and understand how all the material aspects of the human heart work, that person that understands the material world still is not going to understand the human hearts, the thing that we make decisions with, that we feel with, that we understand the world through, because it is so complex. And that is key, at least from my perspective, to understanding the story. Humans, in our heart of hearts, are complex things. Why do we make the decisions that we make? Why do we behave the way that we do? Why do we say the things that we say? It's so nuanced and complex and weird that you can't put your finger on it. There's not a clear-cut answer to that question. So the old woman once again asks, "Where are you from?" He dodges the question. "Lady," he said, "people don't care how they lie. Maybe the best I can tell you is I'm a man. But listen, lady," he said, and paused and made his tone more ominous still. "What is a man?" The old woman began to gum and seed. "What you carry in that tin box, Mr. Shiflett?" "Tools," he said. "Put back. I'm a carpenter." So this is important too. So for those of you that aren't well-versed in kind of biblical knowledge, Jesus was a carpenter. And so now we're getting more kind of correlations between the character of Jesus in the Bible and also Mr. Shiflett. And even that name, Shiflett, sounds kind of like shifty, right? So keep that in mind. So Shiflett, he poses in this figure of the cross, even though he has this kind of stump of an arm. He's a carpenter like Jesus, which is significant. And then he says, "Well, if you come out here to work, I'll be able to feed you and give you a place to sleep, but I can't pay." "I'll tell you that before you begin," she said. There was no answer at once, and no particular expression on his face. He leaned back against the 2x4 that helped support the porch roof. "Lady," he said slowly, "there's some men that some things mean more to them than money." The old woman rocked without comment, and the daughter watched the trigger that moved up and down in his neck. He told the old woman then that almost all people were interested was money. But he asked what a man was made for. He asked her if a man was made for money or what. He asked her what she thought she was made for, but she didn't answer. She only sat rocking and wondered if a one-armed man could put a new roof on a garden house. He asked a lot of questions that she didn't answer. He told her that he was 28 years old and had lived a varied life. And then it goes on to talk about the different things that he's done. And once again, I feel like this section is trying to draw similarities to a story in the New Testament about Jesus and the woman at the well, where Jesus approaches this woman and tells her all about her life. And we even see that Mr. Shiflett here is asking kind of these philosophical questions, like what are humans for? What do they do? Once again, signifying this idea that Shiflett, he's knowledgeable. He's got some wisdom. At the end of that paragraph that I just read, it talks about all the different things that Mr. Shiflett has done. He's a learned man, an experienced man. So we should give weight to the things that he's saying and the things that he's knowing if you're trusting in what's going on here. So essentially, they're going to be talking more and more about what he can do around the house. He winds up staying and being kind of this Mr. Fix-It, right? And that's his role. So afterwards, we start to learn more about what's really going on here. So the old woman's daughter, her name's Lucy Nell. They're actually both named Lucy Nell. But the daughter, Lucy Nell, we know that she's deaf. We know that she's never said a word in her life. We see that Lucy Nell, the daughter, is starting to take on kind of a friendship, a relationship with Mr. Shiflett. And even though she's never said a word through their relationship, she starts speaking. So she says the word bird. And there's something going on here. And we see that the elder Lucy Nell, the mother, we see her ulterior motives start to come into focus here. She, it says, was ravenous for a son-in-law. So she wants Mr. Shiflett to get married to her daughter, the younger Lucy Nell. And that's what she's doing. But is also kind of selfish in that she doesn't want to give Lucy Nell away. So she wants Mr. Shiflett to stay where they are and just come live with them, right? And we see some more kind of allegory and relationship going on with Jesus in the Bible here. In the evenings, he sat on the steps and talked with the old woman and Lucy Nell, who rocked violently in their chairs on either side of him. The old woman's 3 mountains were black against the dark blue sky, and were visited off by various planets and by the moon after it had left the chickens. Mr. Shiflett pointed out that the reason he had improved this plantation was because he had taken a personal interest in it. He said he was going to make the automobile run. So kind of more sacrificial things that are going on here. He's taking an interest in these people and wanting to help them and benefit them, right? So Mr. Shiflett said the trouble with the world was that nobody cared or stopped and looked or took any trouble. He said he never would have been able to teach Lucy Nell to say a word if he hadn't cared and stopped long enough. So this kind of like gives us points for Mr. Shiflett. He's wanting to truly care for these people. He's taken an interest in their situation, but still something feels off about Shifty Shiflett. What is going on? It seems kind of odd that he's interested in Lucy Nell the younger. There's different things that he's done while he's been with the Lucy Nells that make us think that he's got some sort of ulterior motive too. So even though he talks about wisdom and he talks about caring for things and he talks about how the world is going bad, which give us this feeling that he has a moral compass, we still don't quite trust him. So he asks how old Lucy Nell is. 15 or 16, the old woman said. The girl was nearly 30, but because of her innocence, it was impossible to guess. So the young Lucy Nell, we get this idea that she is kind of like abounding with innocence, right? So she is the symbol, this figure of innocence, right? So that night, rocking on the porch, the old woman began her business at once. You want you an innocent woman, don't you? She asked sympathetically. You don't want none of this trash. No, I don't, Mr. Shiflett said. One that can't talk, she continued, can't sass you back or use foul language. That's the kind for you to have right there. And she pointed to Lucy Nell sitting cross-legged in her chair, holding both feet in her hands. Now this is, depending on how you read it, incredibly sexist or commenting on the sexism of the issue, right? So what's kind of intriguing to Mr. Shiflett is the idea of a woman who can't sass him or talk back. And he even says, that's right, he admitted, she won't give me any trouble. So what then is making this good wife, presumably, is not that he's attracted to her or thinks that it will be a good fit or even that he's in love with her, but it's a figure that can't talk back. It's literally a woman who is voiceless, is something that is intriguing to Mr. Shiflett, which is something that loses points for me, at least when I'm reading it, thinking that, man, that's not cool, Shiflett. So later on, the old woman says, Lucy Nell don't even know what a hotel is. They're talking about getting married, and Mr. Shiflett wants to take her to a hotel and kind of wine and dine her. Listen here, Mr. Shiflett, she said, sliding forward in her chair. You'd be getting a permanent house and a deep well and the most innocent girl in the world. You don't need no money. Let me tell you something. There ain't a place any place in the world for a poor, disabled, friendless, drifting man. And this is something that kind of impacts Mr. Shiflett, and pointing out the fact that he's this disabled guy who's just kind of this wandering grifter. The ugly words settled in Mr. Shiflett's head like a group of buzzards in the top of a tree. He didn't answer at once. He rolled himself a cigarette and lit it, and then he said in an even voice, "Lady, a man is divided into two parts, body and spirit." Some more biblical allusions and references that are going on here. The old woman clamped her gums together. "A body and spirit," he repeated. "The body, lady, is like a house. It don't go anywhere, but the spirit, lady, is like an automobile, always on the move, always." And it's kind of weird, enigmatic words that are going on. The spirit, like the heart of a person, we don't know what it's doing. It's like this automobile, once again, reference to the car. We know that he's got the car on his mind. Can go anywhere. It can do anything, right? So I'm only saying a man's spirit means more to him than anything else. So the man's heart or the man's spirit, whatever it is that he wants to do, that's what's important. I would have to take my wife off for the weekend without no regards at all for costs. I got to follow where my spirit says to go. So we see that there's some negotiating that goes on here. The old woman, the elder Lucy Nell, gives him more money, accuses Mr. Shiflett of milking her for the money. And Mr. Shiflett was deeply hurt by the word milk. He didn't doubt that she had more money sewed up in her mattress, but he had already told her he was not interested in her money. But the implication there is that he is, right? "I'll make that do," he said, and rose and walked off without treating with her further. So once again, we're seeing more and more and more of the motives that are going on with Mr. Shiflett. We're starting to trust him less and less and less, right? So on Saturday, the three of them, which is the Lucy Nells and Mr. Shiflett, drove into town in the car that the paint had barely dried on, and Mr. Shiflett and Lucy Nell were married in the ordinary's office, while the old woman witnessed. As they came out of the courthouse, Mr. Shiflett began twisting his neck and his collar. He looked morose and bitter, as if he had been insulted, while someone held him. "That didn't satisfy me none," he said. "That was just something a woman in an office did. Nothing but paperwork and blood tests. What do they know about my blood? If they was to take my heart and cut it out," he said, "they wouldn't know nothing about me. It didn't satisfy me at all." "Satisfy the law," the old woman said sharply. "The law," Mr. Shiflett said in spit. "It's the law that doesn't satisfy me." So we're seeing more and more in terms of references to the human heart, in references to the spirit of a man, in references to blood. These things are enigmatic, mysterious. We can't explain for them. And so afterwards, this is where we get to the real thrust of the story. So we see that he's going on this kind of honeymoon thing with the younger Lucy Nell. They're not making conversation in the car, obviously, because she can't speak. She has a lack of voice, which seems to be making this marriage, which he thought might be good, really boring. It's not working out well. And we see that he became depressed. He goes into this diner, and then he sees that the younger Lucy Nell, his now wife, she just falls asleep, right? So everything that's going on, it makes her fall asleep. He orders her food, tells this boy that's working there to give her the food when she wakes up. The boy looks at this sleeping girl, and maybe because of her innocence, says she looks like an angel of God, which I think is important to note, right? So after this, we see what's going on. "Hitchhiker," Mr. Shiflett explained. "I can't wait. I got to make it to Tuscaloosa." And he leaves. He just splits. He leaves this simple girl who's unable to communicate in this diner alone with a mysterious boy. We see that his plan all along was basically to make off with the money that the elder Lucy Nell gave him and just drive away with his car. He steals the car, right? And so as he's driving away, he sees these signs. One sign that says, "Drive carefully, the life you save may be your own." So as always, if you start to see the title of something, make sure you pay close attention to it. So he sees this hitchhiker. He picks up the hitchhiker, and we see that he's distressed here. He's really struggling. And it's important to note that I think this struggle comes from the idea that he's not some person that thinks he's doing the right thing. He acknowledges it. We know that he has experience. We know that he thinks that the world is going poorly. He knows and thinks that he has done something wrong. And we're seeing that kind of play out. So he feels oppressed when he picks up this hitchhiker, and then out of nowhere, he starts talking about moms and references to his mother to this hitchhiker. It's nothing so sweet, Mr. Shiflett continued, as a boy's mother. She taught him his first prayers at her knee. She gave him love when no other would. She told him what was right and what wasn't, and she seen that he'd done the right thing. Son, he said, I never rued a day in my life like the one I rued when I left that old mother of mine. So he's experiencing this regret. And he even says this, my mother was an angel of God. And I think we're supposed to, as readers, draw direct connections to that, to what the boy in the diner said about the younger Lucy Nell. There's something going on here, God and innocence. And we're seeing that he's feeling regrets. He regrets leaving his mother. He regrets leaving Lucy Nell. But the fact of the matter is he still did it. He still did it, right? So Mr. Shifless, and then we see, we have this whole moment where this hitchhiker who freaks out and he just jumps out of the car, which is kind of scary and startling. And we see that Mr. Shiflett doesn't really do much to help this guy, right? Mr. Shiflett was so shocked that for about 100 feet he drove along slowly with the door still open. A cloud, the exact color of the boy's hat and shaped like a turnip, had descended over the sun, and another, worse looking, crouched behind the car. Mr. Shiflett felt that the rottenness of the world was about to engulf him. He raised his arm and let it fall again to his breast. Oh, Lord, he prayed, break forth and wash the slime from this earth. Which is ironic and wild because he's the slime. He's the slime. He's the guy that's committing all these actions. He leaves a simple girl alone. He steals. He lies. He is the slime. He is the slime. The turnip continued slowly to descend. After a few minutes, there was a guffawing peal of thunder from behind, and fantastic raindrops, like tin can tops, crashed over the rear of Mr. Shiflett's car. Very quickly, he stepped on the gas, leaving behind this hitchhiker, and with his stump sticking out the window, he raced the galloping shower into Mobile. So we see that he's ignoring this boy who probably needs help. He leaves Lucy Nell. He steals the car, even though we know that he has a moral compass. We know that he knows what's right and wrong. We see him struggling with the decisions that he's making. And we think back to what he said about blood and about the human heart and about man's spirit, or humanity's spirit, individuals. Why do we do the things that we do? Why do we do awful and horrible things? Who knows? It's just kind of what we do. And we're left with this sense that humans are complex. And just like you and I know what's right and wrong, we still do crappy things. So with that, I hope you feel encouraged. I will see you later.